Okay, cool. So this is the weekend of September 5th and 6th, I do believe, and a lot of fun things are going on. I'm just going to start telling how I feel. I'm excited. I'm out of my 60th high school reunion, and there's still 50 of us that came to this reunion in California. And human beings are so beautiful. It's an amazing journey. I drove from Salt Lake to here, which is roughly an 11-hour drive, but I stopped in Las Vegas, so I cut it in half. I drove down through the desert at 80 miles an hour with air conditioning on. And it must be a miracle. Yeah, because, I mean, there are times, that trip that I took weeks with, just 100 years ago. So I'm living in a miracle age. And here we are. Here's John Butler. I'm living in a miracle age with all these modern facilities, and not everybody is getting taken care of. And that's why I like studying that's why I like studying Buckminster Fuller. Welcome, John. And John, we're just starting our call. So I'm feeling, and my anticipation is that I'm going to listen in. I'm turning it over to Joe. Joe, you can be the last one to share at the beginning here. And I'm turning it over to you. I'll listen in and participate when I can as I'm driving. And I'm thrilled that you're all here. John Butler, how are you feeling today? What do you expect to get out of the call, and then pass it on?
I'm feeling great. It's a beautiful day in Perth. I've been for a walk in the park, running a little late because I've been out. I really enjoyed last week. It's just so good to be reminded of what Bucky was saying 40 years ago, which is so topical and timely, and so much what's happening now. A little concerning that we appear to have learnt very little over the last 40 years, but I'm hoping to know even more by the time we finish today's session. So thank you very much. And it's lovely to see you here. How do you feel, and what do you hope to take out of today?
Thank you, John. I'm so happy to be back, and I just checked back my notes. I think the last time I joined was 21st of May. That's quite a number of months. Looking forward to be back in this group without having to keep skipping on it. Yeah, so really looking forward to that. And I'm not sure if I can catch up, but I'm really hoping to catch all the videos. Time. So thank you very much. And Joe, how do you feel, and what do you expect to take away today?
I feel very good. Actually, I'm out at Stoic Camp. What's that?
I should have asked Manu or Richard first, right? You're last to go.
That's okay. It's no worries. I'm out at Stoic Camp, and so I'm having a wonderful time. And it's been a great 2 days, so I'm not looking forward to leaving, but all good things must come to an end. So what am I looking forward to today? I'm looking forward just to keep progressing where we left off last week. I'm really excited that we have so many people here today. The next section is really kind of going to get into some post-World War II stuff, from what I understand. So anyway, so let me, Manu, how are you doing? What would you like to take away from today?
Really, I'm now completely emerged. I'm doing well. I hope we're gonna have a beautiful day. Yesterday was beautiful in Cape Town. It's getting a little bit warmer. Now, from last week, as John said, there were quite salient points. One was the notion of transfer of good, energy, and money explained the way power structure behave. That was a very strong point. The very strong role of waterborne people in the expansion of knowledge and technology, Then there was this mention of Venice, the pound of flesh, Shakespeare's way of reminding us of how bankers take away our lives. Then there was the notion that it's always about gold, silver, copper, and food. Gold, silver, copper, that's the reality. is how these real things circulate. And then my takeaway last week was maintaining power by setting boundaries, systems, and processes. So what I expect this week is for us to continue on this and really try to understand how this is relevant and learn a lot from it in order for us to position ourselves to be able to anti-entropically contribute to evolution, at least from a local perspective. So that's what I expect. Who is left? Is
Richard?
Richard. Richard, how do you feel? What do you expect?
Well, I am feeling quite good, robust maybe. Just come back from 11 days of visiting Eastern Canada, 2 different provinces, and reconnecting with ancestors with our 2 adult daughters. Visited a farm that has been in the family line, or at least part of our family line, ever since 1775. Same family living on the same land, same descendants. Also learned a little bit more about the history between Canada and the United States, and what happened in the War of 1812 when America invaded Canada, and Canada fought back and even went as far as reaching the White House and set a little flame to it. It's been a long time since somebody went after the White House the way in which it happened, but it's a little bit different this last time. So anyway, I'm looking forward to getting reconnected with Critical Path and connecting with Fuller and his heritage, and of course this year is always so special because it's the 40th anniversary of his death and the 40th anniversary of his family starting up the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and it's a pleasure to be part of carrying on his legacy. So I look forward to tonight. So I return it to Steve, or is it Joe?
To Joe, I think.
Well, what I can, yeah, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and share my screen. John, would you mind
Sure,
doing that?
happy to read. Yes.
Thank you, my friend.
Can I share a little bit, something completely off this, but quite
Please.
exciting?
Please go
Okay,
ahead.
it has to do with, I think, I don't know if it's really, we talk about the 0 point in the past. I don't know, maybe the others are not aware of it. The 0 point energy.
We've talked, I think we've talked about that more on Wednesdays,
Yes, between
actually.
concavity and convexity, the 0 point energy. Anyway, yesterday, I attended, I attended a webinar that was by Nassim Aramein, Understanding of the Fundamental Nature of Universe through Unified Physics. And they very much talk about space-time. They say mass is when space-time spins. That's the nature of mass. And the second thing that he shared was that the significance of, he called it the 0 point energy. That is when everything comes to the 0 Kelvin. It doesn't mean that there's no life. It just means that you've gone to a point of singularity where things vibrate at so much high energy that you can, the slope of space-time is kind of infinite. And that is the transition between the black hole and the stars. I don't know if it provoked any excitement here, but it was quite interesting yesterday. I could, maybe if I get to the recording, I could send it to everybody to have a look at it and see how it could be interesting to them. Sorry to interrupt with something that is completely off the topic, but it was quite exciting yesterday.
That is exciting, actually. And thank you for sharing, actually. That's fantastic. There, I just looked something up about that, but you might like that. But anyway, I will go ahead and share, if that's okay. I am excited. I'm excited too about what Manu was talking about. Not only that, what you were just talking about, what you said in your intro, when you were talking about boundaries, because I've been thinking a lot about constraints lately. So I'm looking forward to that. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And John, can you go ahead and see?
My audio cut out a second ago. Manu, Nassim Harmin is one of my favorite dudes. Will you make sure you put that link in the chat, please?
Yeah, when I receive it, it was recorded yesterday. They are going to send it. They promise. Okay,
then please email it. Okay.
Mm.
He's one of my favorite dudes. He's into sacred geometry and he's into tetrahedra, and he's doing a whole new unified theory. He's changing the face of physics. The guy's amazing. Thank you.
All right. So, Bucky, there were many desirable and useful items that could be mass-produced and successfully marketed. Young people wanted automobiles, but automobiles were capital equipment. In 1920, capital equipment was sold only for cash. There were enough affluent people in post-World War I USA to provide an easy market for a limited production of automobiles. In 1920, there were no bank-supported time payment sales in the retail trade. The banks would accept chattel mortgages and time payments on large mobile capital goods, such as trucking equipment, for large, rich corporations. Banks would not consider risking their money on such perishable, run-away-withable capital equipment as the privately owned automobile. Because the banks would not finance the buying of automobiles and so many money-earning but capital-less young people wanted them, shyster loaners appeared who were tough followers of their borrowers when they were in arrears. Between the ever-increasing time payment patronage and the affluent, a market for automobiles was opening that could support mass production. In 1922, there were about 125 independent automobile companies. They were mostly headed by colourful automobile designing and racing individuals for whom most of the companies were named. They survived by individually striving each year to produce an entirely new and better automobile, most of which were costly. Many accepted orders for more than they had the mechanical capacity to produce. Their hometown financiers would back these auto-designing geniuses so that they could buy better production tooling and build larger factories. Wall Street sold swiftly increasing numbers of shares in auto companies. More and more of them went broke for lack of production, distribution, and maintenance experience on the part of the auto designer managements. In 1926, the Wall Street brokerage, down a little bit, thanks, Joe.
Oh, sorry.
Just a little bit too far up.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Dillon, Reed and Co. made a comprehensive cost study of the auto production field. They found that 130,000 cars a year was, in 1926, the minimum that could be accounted as mass production and sold at production prices. Any less production had to carry a much higher price tag. To warrant the latter, the cars had to be superlatively excellent. The English-built Rolls-Royce brought the highest price on the American market. There was fierce competition amongst Packard, Peerless, Cadillac, Pierce Arrow, Locomobile, Lozier, Leland, and others for the top American car. All of these premium cars' frames, bodies, engines, and parts were manufactured within their own factories. there were several in-between classes,
Sorry.
slow down, Joe.
Oh, did I get too far? Oh, sorry
Down a
about
little
that.
bit more, please. Down a little bit more. Stop. There were several in-between classes, such as that of the Buick. Most of the 100 or so cars in this intermediate range were assembled from special engines, frames, and other parts made by independent manufacturers. The mortality in auto companies was great. Dillon Read led Wall Street out of its dilemma by buying several almost bankrupt companies closely located to one another, such as those of the Dodge family, whose joint production capacity topped the 130,000 units per year mass production figure. They named their new venture the Chrysler Company. Dillon Read fired the auto company presidents, who were primarily interested in new car designing, and replaced them with production engineers. Wall Street followed suit and put in production engineers as presidents of all the auto companies, except Ford, who owned his company outright and had no obligation to Wall Street and its legion of stock buyers. Old Henry himself was already the conceiver, initiator, and artist master of mass production. Because the American public was in love with the annual automobile shows, the Wall Street financiers who had thrown out all the colourful auto designer presidents started a new game by setting up the Madison Avenue advertising industry, which hired artists who knew how to use the new 1920 airbrush to make beautiful drawings of only superficially, not mechanically, new dream cars. They made drawings of the new models, which required only superficial mudguard and radiator changes, with no design changes in the hidden parts. Parts were purchased by the big companies from smaller, highly competitive parts manufacturers operating in the vicinity of Detroit. This was the beginning of the downfall of the world-esteemed integrity of Yankee ingenuity, which was frequently, forthrightly, and even naively manifest in American business. Big business.
Sorry, it's just, this is not.
Okay, stop. Big business in the USA set out to make money deceitfully by fake new models, and engineering design advance was replaced by style design change. In the late 20s, first Ford and then General Motors instituted their own time financing corporations. The bankers of America said, let them have it. They'll be sorry. Autos, few. We don't want to go around trying to recover these banged up autos when the borrower is in default. The bankers said it's very immoral to buy automobiles on time. They are just a luxury. What the bankers did like to support in the new mass productivity was tractor-driven farm machinery. Farm machinery was easy to sell. As the farmer sat atop the demonstration ploughing or harvesting equipment, with its power to go through the fields, doing an amount of work in a day equal to what had previously taken him weeks, he said to himself, I can make more money and also take it a little easier. So the bankers approved the financing of the production and marketing of the farm machinery. They held a chattel mortgage on the machinery and a mortgage on the farmland itself and all its buildings. The bankers loved that. They were enthusiastic. There was enthusiastic bank acceptance of the selling of such equipment on time to the farmers. The bankers did not consider this immoral. The farmer was producing food wealth. The automobilist was just joy riding. Then there came a very bad hog market in 1926. Many farmers were unable to make the payments on their power-driven equipment. The local country banks foreclosed on the delinquent farmers' mortgages and took away their farms and machinery. The bankers had assumed that the farms were going to be readily saleable. It turned out, however, that there were not so many non-farmers wanting to become farmers, and most of the real farmers had been put out of business by the bank foreclosures, so they couldn't buy back their own farms. There were no city people eager to go out and buy one of these farms. How are you going to keep them down on the farm after they've seen Paris, were the words of a popular World War I song? So the dust bowls developed in the upturned, unsown soil began to blow off the farms. It is relevant to note that in 1900, 90% of US citizens were living and working on the farms. In 1979, only 7% were on the farms, mostly as local supervisors for big absent ownership corporations. The owners of the farmlands today are no longer farmers or even individual humans. They are the great business conglomerates. What began in 1934 as government subsidies and loans to farmers for farm machinery, later to keep acreage out of production, would by 1978 result in President Carter making enormous payments to appease big corporations for cutting off vital grain and other strategic shipments to Russia. Next, the US government would make enormous subsidies to bail out large corporations such as Lockheed and Chrysler, which is basic military suppliers the US government could not allow to go bankrupt. Eventually, the US taxpayers will be asked to make free of risk bailouts of private enterprises, corporations, with initial physical assets worth over $1 billion classified as risk enterprises.
Could we stop
Yeah.
right there for a moment? I
Yep.
think that's a good stopping point.
Yep.
I'll just make a quick comment.
Yep.
You know, this is, I think you're seeing the financialization of everything, the gradual process of that. This is also what we're seeing here is, Bucky talks about this in the Crunch of Giants as well, and the bailout of Chrysler and its ties to the defense industry, and pretty much a consolidation of a lot of these companies and the failure for the government to stop some of these merger and acquisitions where these companies have become too big to fail. So then you see the problem of moral hazard and a lot of the creativity that you had seen maybe at the turn of the century with people that were entrepreneurs. There are more big corporations now that are actually looking to just meet their shareholder expectations or the bottom line or the profits. So, you know, I think that this is an interesting, you know, perspective to explore a little bit more, because I think, again, you're seeing the financialization of everything. I'll leave it there for now.
But isn't
Anybody
it
else?
what we have today? Isn't
What's
it the
that?
same problem
I think it's worse.
that we have in 2008? 2008? That we have
2008.
in today?
Well, the lack of integrity of financiers has increased, and we now have the afterpay companies that encourage people to buy before they can afford it and then pay back. And governments, certainly in Australia, have started to intervene in that, because young people are being encouraged to spend money on luxury items and then pay them off on terms on the initial basis that if you make I think it's 4 payments on time, there's no interest. But of course, they usually default on a payment, and then there's interest, and it's quite substantial interest, and it's been designed to get around the restrictions that are put on bank lending. In fact, there've always been those, as Bucky wrote, in the early days of automobile sales, who were prepared to, he called them shysters, lend people the money to have something they wanted, the car, on unfair terms. And the farmers ultimately defaulted because they had a bad year and lost their farms and their machinery. So there's no humanity in that. It's pure greed, and an appropriate finance system is critical to the growth of business. But we see the other extreme, which is microloans in third world countries, where I think more often women than men borrow to start a small business. And there's an absolutely minimal default rate because they are responsible, they become self-sufficient, they have a small family business. That little bit of capital, that tiny bit of capital gets them started, and they pay it back. So it's you know, the nature of finance is very important to a country or to a world. Who's financing, on what terms? Do they care if they send businesses broke or send individuals broke? Quite a critical part of our world.
I think you are bringing the real distinction between entrepreneur, enterprise, and corporate. And people don't seem, yes? Anne?
It's okay. Carry on, Manu. Sorry. Finish first.
No, I just wanted to make that point that the two are very, very different. An entrepreneur and a corporate is different. Though in law, they are subject to so-called similar laws or regulations, but is the metaphysical, I wouldn't say rhythm, the metaphysical background of enterprising is very different from that of corporate.
Yeah, I have something to add to this because this is something we've been going through. We're talking about financing, right? Financing comes from either banks or even investments, right? So the past 5 years, we've been going on a journey of trying to get funding for the growth of our group, yeah. And one of the things I realized is that it's hard because number one is because I'm female. Okay, I'll qualify this. Nothing to do with gender biases or anything like that. I think it has to do with also when women started becoming involved with business, right? And I realized my generation was the first one that could become anything that we wanted to be, right? Whether it was to finish our education, it was, but most of the women in my generation, and that's Steve, I'm just about a year off from you, they're mostly in high-level corporate companies right now. And there are not a lot of women entrepreneurs. When I look back at my 60th birthday celebration with my friends, yeah, and because we were struggling with getting the investments, and I realized that it wasn't attractive to invest into businesses that women were running, yeah, because the ROI is a lot slower, and then it's like the businesses that we're in is not sexy. So I give you an example because when we run businesses we run businesses that are of interest to us, right? So men have been running it for so many years that the type of businesses they're in is like looking at technology. Not many women are in technology, definitely not my generation, right? Then we're in education, we're in water filtration systems, we're in childcare and food business, and all the things that make a family. And I realized it's hard to get funding because like ROI, I keep getting this gets thrown at me, like education takes 4 or 5 years, to see an ROI, yeah. When the same amount I put into something else, I can see it in 6 months. That gets thrown all the time. So then I realized it was really difficult, and we had to change the narrative of our I guess the funding of the business. And finally, we're in we got an offer that was fair, very fair for the first time ever from a gentleman, right? Is this from an investor who was looking at it as something for society. And they're impact investors, but we didn't know how to write it for impact investors, and we were going around the regular route. But I'm just sharing that it was such an eye-opener that we really had to change out the narrative, and we got a really, really nice, fair offer at the moment. So we're going through the process, but it was a difficult 5 years just to go down that route. Yeah. So so one of the things that we're doing here in Malaysia, we're trying to see how to help women with more women's businesses, because you're not it's not so easy to invest into another fashion business, a manicure, pedicure business. How do we do that, right? So anyway, we're looking into what to do about that, but we're going to get ours done first and then take on that after. So when we go through critical path, it's really, really relevant. Yeah. I'm done.
No, that is
Thank
important.
you.
And
Yeah. John?
Uh, okay.
Yes, we got to resume reading or?
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick comment about the
Yeah, sure.
entrepreneur, moving to the entrepreneur. One thing, at least in the States, that now it's a lot of people in at least in the Silicon Valley, they don't look at building a company anymore. Sometimes they look at selling it first, and that's a project. That's not a company, and that's a very big distinct change that we've seen when you have multinationals being able to have all this cash on hand and just buy companies. People's values and their targets change, including the entrepreneurs. So I think that that's worth mentioning, is that when people are looking at the potential, I know some people that I used to speak to that were pretty big in this, as far as helping people accelerate their startups, and they had been quite successful, but they had strong relationship with conglomerates like Danaher and other companies, and many of the people that were actually looking to start companies, they were looking to build them. They were almost building them to be bought. There's nothing wrong with it being bought, but it is when it's not necessarily, it's no longer kind of yours, and that's the removal of the entrepreneur. It's from the process. Anyway, I think that's worth mentioning.
I want to say something about that too. Because Mitt Romney, who was a presidential candidate in the United States, made his money operating from a hedge fund ROI. We're going to sell it after we buy it point of view. So he would go in and buy these companies that had big assets, and they had a good product, they had good employees, they had good relationship with their customers. But these guys would go in, buy the company, strip out the assets, destroy the company, fire them, and strip it down to where it was just making a huge profit, and then sell it for a big gain. And as a result, they undermined the integrity of the product, because all Wall Street was looking for was an ROI. They're just looking for a return on investment. And they're forgetting this whole idea of how do I create value, which Buckminster Fuller keeps pointing back to, right? He says land creates value because land grows food. And there are these other assets that have no intrinsic value. And somehow capitalism doesn't give labor and land its due. So the point you bring up, Joe, is really profound. And I just want to, Mitt Romney made his money by stripping companies. That's what they do. And these hedge funds, they don't care about the quality of a product. They don't care about the health of the economy. Like, for example, in 2008, the banks started buying up when the real estate crash came. The banks started buying up the real estate. And these big hedge funds started buying up real estate in order to rent it. And they would pay way more than it was worth because they knew there was going to be inflation. And then eventually the property would be worth more and they could raise the rents. And right now in America, there's a shortage of housing. Rents are sky high. And there's a crisis in the middle class because this whole relationship of capital to value and to community is just totally gone. So, good point there, Joe. And I kind of dropped out when Anne was sharing her story, but I'm sure that's the same thing, is that, so I think this is really a key point. And I regard myself as an expert in financing and funding. I show people how to invest with their IRA accounts. I show people how to create notes on assets, how to collateralize and assemble assets in order to create collateral. And these things can be done in a very healthy way, but they can also be done like pirates, like Mitt Romney. And somehow it's morally justified. It doesn't matter how you make your money as long as you make your money. And here's Anne offering a product that can change the world. And, and finally she found an investor who cared about humanity. So anyway, there's some rambling points. Thanks for letting me talk.
No, I think that this is one of those key points, because we've talked about this in the past, where you start managing yourselves to the metrics as opposed to actually producing the value of whatever you're, create the value you're creating. So start managing yourself to the price earnings ratio instead of managing yourself to actually the product that you're producing in the first place. And that happens. And when you lose that vision, then forget it. Anyway, let's get back to it.
We
We were
now
just-
return.
That's right. Local supervisors, big absent ownership corporations. The owners of the farmlands today are no longer farmers or even individual humans. They are the great business conglomerates. What began in 1934 as government subsidies and loans to farmers for farm machinery, later to keep acreage out of production, would by 1978 result in President Carter making enormous payments to appease big corporations for cutting
I
off
think
vital.
I think we're starting. Yeah, we read this. I think this is where we.
Oh, yes,
Yeah,
yes, you're right. Yep, yep.
So let me
We now
just scroll
return-
down a little bit.
Yep. We now return to the 1926, 27, 28, 29 sequence of events developed from selling the farmers' machinery on the bankers' drop-dead terms. Mortgage means on death terms. In 1927 and 1928, the bigger Western city banks began to foreclose on their local country banks that had financed the farm machinery sales and had been borrowing from the bigger city banks to cover their unprecedentedly expanded loaning. First, the little and then the successively bigger banks found that they had foreclosed on farmhouses that had no indoor toilets, many with roofs falling in, barns in poor condition, with the replevined farm machinery rusting out in the open, and no customers. Word of the bad news gradually went around. Small bank runs began, and in 1929 came the great crash in the stock market. All business went from worse to worser. Unemployment multiplied, prices steadily dropped. Nobody had money with which to buy. Bigger and bigger banks had to foreclose on smaller banks until finally in early 1933, there came one day in which 5,000 banks closed their doors to stop the run on their funds. People were dismayed and both individually and collectively helpless to do anything to combat the economic collapse. The economy had gone to pieces. People did not parade and protest. They became so low in spirit and listless that they just sat around silently in their homes or in public places. The New York subway stations were filled with people sleeping on the concrete platforms and stairways. No religious organisations were willing to let people sleep in their churches. There came a pecking order point when the central Chicago banks foreclosed on all the other big Western city banks, followed by the big New York City central banks foreclosing on Chicago's central banks. Finally came the denouement when the big New York banks found themselves about to close because they were already behind the scenes insolvent. This occasioned the US Congress voting to accelerate by 4 months the presidential inauguration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who minutes after taking his oath of office signed the bank moratorium, which momentarily suspended the acknowledgement of the death of the wealthy landowners' banking system that had lost all or much of its depositors' money. About a month later, Congress voted to the President of the USA the ability to control all money. Months later, again, the Supreme Court upheld that legislation. The US citizens themselves and their government had become the wealth resource of last recourse. The underwriting wealth belongs to all the people and not to the few. This happened also to be the description of socialism. The 150-year-long infinite wealth poker hand and its uncalled bluffing was over. The called hands were suddenly down. It turned out that the wealthy's wealth was non-existent. Their marble-walled, steel-barred, visibly vaulted banks had been psychologically attractive to the depositors, who preferred to have their earnings and savings deposited along with the wealth of the powerfully rich. What the banks had been doing was to loan the people's deposits to other people. The banks had no money themselves. What they had done was to capitalise their land at their self-asserted value and had been credited with that value of stock in the bank's ownership. In 1933, for the first time ever, the hands of the US American wealthy were exposed, and by inference, all land-based capitalism everywhere around the world, most were money empty. Their land and multi-servanted mansion values dropped to almost nothing. Nobody had the almost nothing amount of money to buy those richly housed estates. There was one exception to the last statement. The Vatican-administered Roman Catholic Church's world organisation, which for a pittance acquired many extraordinary properties at that time, which it converted into monasteries and convents, colleges and schools. The game of deedable land wealth had been a bluff from its very beginning. Multi-millennia ago, when that little man on a horse armed with a club first rode up to the giant shepherd leader of a tribe and said bluffingly, "It's very dangerous out there in the wilderness for beautiful sheep such as yours," and the shepherd leader's ultimate coercion into accepting protection from the claiming and proclaiming owner of the land. Land ownership did not go back to an act of God. All the kings always had their priests present when the land claimage was made by their explorers. The priests planted their crosses to confirm that the king's ownership was blessed by God. The Roman Catholic Church, starting in its emperor-pope days, had been in the deeded land business for going on 2,000 years. It is as yet the world's largest real estate owner. Real, a Spanish word, means royal, the succession of king-deeded estate lands. With the bluff of wealth over in March 1933, almost all business in America stopped. On the inauguration of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the emergency was so absolute that Congress voted unanimously for whatever corrective measures the New Deal administration prescribed. Roosevelt and his advisors said, "One thing is clear. Despite the emergency, America abhors socialism. Americans don't like the assumption that everybody is equal. Americans are so independent, they don't feel at all equal. They don't like socialism, but the fact is that we, the American people, are going to have to guarantee our own bank accounts. People don't like to keep their money under their mattresses and prefer to put it into a bank. So we'll have to do what we can to rehabilitate the banks. We, the people, acting unanimously through our government, are going to have to guarantee the safety of each deposit in the banks to a convincingly substantial amount, $5,000. We will leave the bank in the ownership of the management of the stockholders of those banks that, by virtue of the presidential moratorium, are as yet theoretically alive and will reopen and will be able to progressively accredit their depositors with some percentage of their original deposits. But let us not deceive ourselves. With the government of the people guaranteeing the bank accounts, it becomes in operating fact socialism. On the other hand, people themselves know so little about banking, credit concepts, and the history of power structures, they will not know that they have adopted socialism since the government has not taken possession of the banks. People will think well of we the people as the government guaranteeing new deposits in the banks up to $5,000.
Well,
Society-
can we stop there maybe? Are there any comments and questions? Or I have a couple, but go ahead, anybody.
Come on, Joe. Come on.
I mean, the first one is, my thought is that the church comes in and buys all that property and they're not taxed.
That's
That's
right.
that's my first thought, is that they come in and they acquire all this property and an economic downtime. My second thought is that the label of socialism itself, even the way Franklin Delano Roosevelt's using it, it's not helpful. It puts a label and a broad brush over a whole kind of economic initiatives that can be potentially helpful in certain circumstances, and if you label it something, then people tend to reject it. So I think that that's actually a really unfortunate an unfortunate thing, because sometimes, you know, securing people's bank deposits up to $5,000 and, you know, saying that's kind of socialism. I don't know. Anybody have any thoughts?
My question to you, Joe,
Mhm.
and to everybody. What is the difference between Fabians, socialism, and liberals? I'm talking about really fundamentally. Is there a difference?
Between who's the first group?
Fabians.
Fabians.
I don't
So
know anything
What
about
about
the
Fabians?
Fabians.
Yeah,
I'm not familiar with Fabians, I must say.
maybe John can explain what the Fabians are.
No.
The Fabian Society is a society that, let me just take it from the, let me check it here. Okay, Fabian Society is a British socialist organization whose purpose is to advance the principle of social democracy and democratic socialism via gradualist and reformist effort in democracies rather than revolutionary overthrow. It is Do you hear what I say? I'm reading
Yep.
here from
Yeah.
Wikipedia.
Yep.
You can get the concept of social democracy is embedded in the name of one of the Canadian political parties called New Democrats. Social democracy is pretty much the kind of democracy that we have in the Scandinavian countries. And so you get, to some extent, the opposite of what everybody thinks is the independent, sort of self-determining kind of person that relishes on individualism over collectivism. And so that's when you get to Bucky Fuller making the argument that both socialism, in the sense of Marxism, and capitalism, in the sense of Western capitalism, both being insufficient. They both have serious dark sides, because one refuses to recognize the importance of the collective. And in many respects, the United States is probably a prime example of that. And the other is what doesn't recognize the individual rights. And of course, sort of the Russian communism was touted to be an example of that. And so somewhere in the middle, you get what I think a lot of people are now trying to strive towards, is something that could be easily called social democracy, because it mixes the individual rights and the collective responsibilities and rights. That's how I think of the question that is rooted in what is Fabianism.
But I think in the context Bucky is talking about, and in actual fact, in reality, whether it takes the name of socialism, liberalism, communism, Marxism, or the so-called capitalism, whenever the fundamental of concentration of the energy in the hands of a class will always end up in the class coercing the others for doing things that are to their advantage. Is the same horse riding guy or whoever come with a priest and claim land, planting. Joe, you talk about no tax. You don't tax God.
Yeah.
If the symbol of God is planted them by the priest, well, you know, in order to preserve order. So it has to do with beliefs. What do you make people believe? And people believe in a way, then most of the time, those who know what they are doing, they can push the masses to unknowingly support whatever they're pursuing. So what my point here is that the key, again, over and over, is education.
Yeah, it's education.
Yes.
But I think underneath that is the fundamental sort of inside-outside issue. We've sometimes talked about it in terms of the triangle, and what's inside is mine, and what's inside is important, and what's outside is either the evil, the devil, the irrelevant. And in order to reinforce that, we demonize it. So, you know, there's an awful lot of talk today in the US about weaponization. Well, that's precisely what we often do, is we weaponize the in-group to harm the out-group, and we exploit them.
And how do you recognize that, Richard?
Pardon?
How do I recognize that? Through what? What you are saying? Yeah, I agree with your point, but how do I recognize it? Does the uneducated, can the uneducated recognize that? What I mean educated is somebody who probably has come across fundamental principles.
Yeah,
And
I know.
somebody
All I'm
who has
saying
either
is that
lived or studied history.
if you educate to recognize all, in terms of even Bucky's, 100% of humanity, that's one kind of education. But if you educate people to demonize others, or demonize something that is not considered relevant to my advantage, that's the misuse of education. And I guess, again, I don't want to pick on the US at the moment, but the US makes it easy to pick on. And you see what's happening in states like Florida, trying to demonize all kinds of things and push them to the outside, and pave the way for whatever's considered the inside priority. It's interesting how we weaponize in order to take advantage for ourselves by disadvantaging others.
What do we call education, Richard?
What's
Because
that?
I think that maybe that's where there might be some difference. Because education, if I read here, education comes from a duty, which means to bring out or develop something latent or potential. It's not to feed in. It is to bring out.
Yeah, no, I agree. And but when you again, I'm just going back to Bucky, but if we are grounded on the beliefs of Malthus and the Malthusian sort of British Empire attitude of there's not enough to go around, then education will not advance the primary principle that you're getting at, because they'll educate to advantage themselves over others.
But belief is fed in, Richard.
Well, if I
Belief
can
is not
interject,
pulled out, it is fed in. And we are
I-
saying that education is a facilitation of bringing out your potential, of bringing out you to live in harmony with nature, as you say.
Yeah, I agree.
That's-
But
So,
those
so
who
when I talk
dominate,
about education, that's what I mean.
yeah,
So,
I don't mean learning,
yeah,
you know.
no, I agree.
Okay.
So there's a couple things really quickly. I want to get back to the reading, but what was talked about in there is American individualism, and I'll put some links in the chat. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and they're very deep rooted. And yes, it is education that ultimately will having an understanding as to why American individualism exists in the first place is really important. And this is one study that was done that was actually, this talks about it, but America, the American people actually, in one other study that I was reading, attribute most of the success to the individual traits of the actor. So what I'm saying that is that they tend to see the individual as somebody that made it on their own and not within the collective. And this myth permeates American culture. So America has socialism. It's just corporate socialism. That's the difference. It's not, and it's, as Manu had mentioned, what the biggest problem with that is you have the concentration of energy and wealth. And that is problematic. And what Bucky has taken us through here very nicely, I think, is the financialization, the consolidation, the death of the entrepreneur, the American individualism, the American myth, and then you start to see how, and what Manu said was actually exactly on point, that once you have that type of influence, they tend to make the rules that benefit, the few, not everyone. But this is a very deep thing. I'll put another survey in the chat before there was a very, very good podcast. I'll put a couple things in there that would really help. And I think it's very important to listen to this, because if you really want to know what the human psychology is with this, I would really highly recommend listening to this. At least, it's only an hour of your time, but it would actually give you a history of why Americans think the way they do when it comes to individualism and how they bought into that myth. But anyway, I think that's an important thing to note when we're talking about here, is that even Roosevelt, as he tried to implement programs, he had to caution and say, Americans don't like to be called socialists. But what happened is they ended up becoming socialists for corporations. Anyway.
And Joe, in support of what you say, and also in clarifying, I think that it's always been about learning to think.
Yes.
Right. Because there is a lot of things. You've learned, that's why Bucky developed a whole geometry of thought. And many, many people coming. I mean, you talk about Ray Dalio today. That's what you want people to think.
Right.
Most people, if you don't know how to think, you will mimic, because we already has two ways. We first mimic, that is, we monkey something that is happening by observing and trying to do. And then we ask the question after. We ask the question, and asking the question is thinking. Asking the question is starting to divide something. So you try to kind of grab the whole, you just saw it partially, and then you start dividing it. That's the power of a question, is to cut through, to say why, what if? And that's thinking. But if you beliefs in not thinking.
Right. That's right.
Belief is monkeying. That's what it is. When you say a belief, it means that you are a prisoner of a faith. You are a prisoner of what seems to work. That's your belief. It's fundamental. That's your support. Until something comes and shakes it to make you think otherwise. That is your belief.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean,
But you have to believe in education in order to educate.
Okay.
agreed.
Yes. Chicken and
And
egg.
critical thing, and the thing that I most appreciate about Bucky in general is, people will ask me, a lot of times, what's his political persuasion or whatever, and they'll ask me, is he a does he consider himself a long-termist, whatever that is, and I don't think he looks at himself like that. He's a systems thinker who looks at the whole, who thinks critically about problems. And it's, when you think critically, you're addressing an issue. You're not necessarily narrowly putting a label to something. And I think that that's what we've gotten away from, is the idea of how to solve a problem, as opposed to now we just put labels on everybody. And it does come down to education and critical thinking, but it also involves dialogue. And that's the other thing that's broken down, is now it's either you're on our side or you're on the other side. And that's the biggest problem of them all. So, and there's a demonization of the other. And that's another problem. So, and then those beliefs are very dangerous indeed. So
The polarization and the misinformation.
Misinformation, and that is one of the great risks, I think, to democracy right now.
Beautifully put, Joe. Really.
What's that?
To think, to divide.
Right.
Demonization is not recognizing the principle of duality.
That's
and
right.
Cooperation is cycles and patterns. In a geometrically wise. To think, to ask a question dividing or the why. To demonize is to say, is not to recognize a cycle, is to stay in the phase. You say, the other guy doesn't exist, or the other guy is against me, or the other thing is just, you don't recognize that there's day and night. And to cooperate systems is cycle patterning. And the process of thinking is those three.
That's right.
You divide to multiply, and then you integrate to unify.
I was just thinking about it. Instead, we're just dividing.
Yeah.
I mean,
think one
so
of-
we're not dividing to multiply. We're actually just dividing.
Yeah.
And now we keep doing it even more.
You dividing, excluding, and you don't care about what is happening to that. Not realizing that that in universe is accumulating into something else that is sweep you away.
Yeah, I
It's
think
like
this,
when you talk about the banks coming in, making loan first, they kick out the entrepreneurs. Then they start just financializing farming. They didn't care about what is going on in there. So they made money, and then there's a shock, there's a problem. They have all of this land, this machinery, they don't know what to do. Because they didn't realize that the entrepreneur was also part of the ecosystem. It wasn't, you need all of those things. You need to facilitate the exchange, but you need, those vertices that play their role in the transmission of energy all around.
I
Thank
think
you for
one of
letting me
the,
know.
I think
Steve?
one of the things that Manu is talking about, you guys are talking about dividing, and I think to Richard's point, and maybe this is part of the problem today, education is a great solution, but to Richard's point, education is becoming, they're weaponizing education. And I think the problem is, what is education? What are we to learn? 25 years ago, 30 years ago, there was some consensus as to what history looked like. But of course, that consensus was written by the pirates. And what's happened is that real education is learning about how the system operates. But the system doesn't, at least the pirates in the system do not want us to know how the system operates. And so we start to categorize education and education starts becoming a weapon. It's happening in Florida. I think Richard's point is really good. And I think we can talk about ideals of what education is supposed to be and represents that, I think, in terms of what the world will look like one day if she could survive financially, and somehow we can get the world to shift out of this individualistic rate of return thing into, okay, I want to invest in something that helps the community. And of course, we've got a couple of green hedge funds out there. We focused a year or so ago on a guy named Thompson. I think, Joe, somebody told me about Thompson, who left Wall Street and started to really put money into businesses that upheld community and upheld the value of individual contribution. So I think that there have been a lot of good points here today, and our problem is I don't think we know what education is. I think Anne's got a hammer on it, but she's got to get people to agree that, educating kids on how to run a business and how to take their ideas and their interests and create value with that in their community. I mean, that whole concept is a Buckminster Fuller concept. And I think it would lie on dead ears with 80% of Americans. 80% of Americans would not understand what you're talking about. So I just got to throw that out there.
Yeah. Steve, I'd like to add to that, because the past 2 months, actually my biggest concern joining in today was whether I could follow up from where you start, right? What you guys have done, spoken about, discussed about, and whether I could just or I need a couple of weeks, to get back into the understanding of how far you've gone with the discussion, right? But I just want to say thank you, because all of you have made it very easy and make Buckminster easy for me to get back. Now, sorry, Joe, you want to say something?
No, I was just saying that is sometimes that's hard to do.
Yes.
Just because of the language, that's all.
Yeah, I just want to add something about this education thing. The past few months because we have been heading out into Thailand and Indonesia. So we've been very, very busy with the growth. The doors have opened to Thailand, the doors have opened to Indonesia, and they're not in small ways, they're in really big ways. With Thailand, we are now collaborating with the Thai Health Ministry, not even education, it's the Ministry of Health, because they're concerned with mental health and social emotional health of the children, right, up to toddlers to about the age of 8. That's where they're starting, right? And then in Indonesia, it's the third generation Indonesians, and they're wealthy families, who are now making the decisions as to the sort of education they want for their children. So it's been very empowering, at the same time very encouraging to see that happening, the choices that are made. And you're absolutely right about it being weaponized, and you're right about it being manipulated and so on, because our biggest fight over the past 30 odd years, because I've been teaching that long, 36, and the primary struggle and the biggest stumbling block is actually the parents, number one. Number two, because the institutions have done such a phenomenal job marketing and branding themselves that they actually override the needs of what the industries are actually looking for. And also who exactly should be the certification bodies, right? Because institutions generally certify knowledge, yeah, and the theoretical side of stuff, whereas the industries and businesses need the practical side. So that's why you keep hearing people say that when they graduate, they come out to work, they don't hit the ground running. And I got these polls from Gallup polls. It was in 2016, if I'm not wrong. You can get it online easily. They were looking at the gap, between what universities think they're producing and whether how well equipped their graduates are for the real world. And the universities actually rated it. They did a poll on that one, and the results came back that it's 90%, that 96% ready, right? Then they used the same polls, and they got the companies and people who are hiring and to do the same poll, and it came back 11%. Huge gap, right? So we got this information actually from Minerva School Group. Yeah, they're doing education in a very different way from the US. I met them in Hong Kong, and I got that and you can find it in the online. So we started thinking, because they kind of matched what we're talking about, because there's a mismatch between education and the real world, right? So that right there gave us the statistics to put out there whenever we talk to parents and so on. But it's a really, really tough sell. So number one, the parents. Number two are the universities, because until they change how they bring and register students based on whatever the criteria are, you literally it's very difficult to move it across the world. But the change is happening because the younger parents, now they're in their 30s, are realized they don't want the old school education. And so in Indonesia, it was really interesting because these young parents, they're offering for us to go there, not asking any financial resources from us. It's about bringing the program over. They'll make it happen. They're bringing the resources of their family and all the connections that they've had. So something to to think about as well, as to now the decision makers are the people in their 30s. And people who are doing education, they have to really, really change it up. So I just want to also add, when you said that, Manu, divide and excluding versus integrate and unifying, I'm like, wow, that is such a powerful thing that we can literally put that as the core, things in schools, that they have to understand how to integrate and unify. Then you compete, you compete out there rather than dividing and excluding, which is what our country is really, Malaysia is really great at doing. Yeah. So yeah, that's just my thoughts on. Oh yeah, one last thing. Steve, you're talking about the entrepreneur part. One of the biggest things that we're putting out there is that it is actually the biggest leveler. Okay, it's the biggest leveler for society, right? And economically, because we're trying to get parents to understand why their children need to do entrepreneurship, right? And so I started looking at the cost of education. It is hefty. I'll talk about that another day. But the point is that entrepreneurship, it doesn't matter where people come from, children come from, whether they're from good schools, not such good schools, city schools, rich schools, poor schools, or whether they can speak English or not, because one of the biggest criteria for learning entrepreneurship in most universities is you have to have a credit in English. Yeah, but whether you speak Hokkien, which is a dialect, or any language, you can run a business. Whether you can see or not see, whether you're good looking or not, whether you're old or young, you can start it without any education. And so right now, we're actually trying to drive it at the country level. We've been writing into the Ministry of Youth and Sports. They're listening now. They're using our phrasing as well, and bringing it up in Parliament, because one of our purpose is actually to nurture nation builders, wealth creators, and job providers. Okay, that is our purpose right now with the entrepreneur program going forward. The Ministry of Youth and Sports came to talk to us, and they said, we want you all to look into, can you help the people in this, what they call the NEET category, NEET, not in education, not in employment, education, or training. I'm like, sure, that's what entrepreneur training can do, mindset shifts can do. So that's a little bit of an update as to what we've been up to over here. But Steve, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Anne. So we'll get back to, I do want to close just and speak about how important what you're doing during my wrap up, because I think that is critical, especially the way you're teaching is, I think, the most important part is that you're actually teaching not only kids to think, but how to live in the real world too.
Yeah.
But John, should we, hang on, let me scroll down a little bit. Shall we start?
Where did we finish up? Was it above this, just above this?
It was just above this. Let's just make sure.
Society,
That's
society,
where it was. I
right.
think that's it.
Yeah. Yep, that's it.
Deposits in the banks, yes. Here it is, yes. Society likes the idea of a bank as a safekeeping device. People have always believed that when they put their money in the bank, it stayed there. They had no idea it went out on loan within minutes after it came in. They were completely hoodwinked by the appearance of the banks as safe, fireproof, and robber-proof depositories of their earnings. Even today, in the last 20 years of the 20th century, people know little more about banks than they did during the 1929 crash or at the depths of the Depression in 1932, when all they knew was that they had lost their deposits in most of them. In 1933, 34, 35, and 36, the New Deal and the US Congress diligently investigated the banking system and the practices of its most powerful leaders. They found many malpractices, which we will discuss later. Most predominantly, they found the banks loaded with worthless mortgages on properties that were unsaleable because uninhabitable. Mortgages on buildings without roofs, bathrooms, etc. The government said the first thing we have to do is to make those mortgages we've inherited worth something. At this point, the American government dictated the banking strategy and started refinancing of the building industry. The so-called building industry was already 2,000 years behind the arts of building ships of the sea and sky, which ships of the sea and sky are, in fact, environment controlling structures in exactly the same sense that land buildings are environment controlling structures. While the design of the seagoing and airgoing environment controls are floatably and flyably weight considerate and semi-autonomous because they generate their own power, desalinate their own water, etc., there is no weight consideration in the designing of the land-anchored environment controls. They don't have to float or fly. They are utterly dependent on sewers, water lines, electric lines, highway maintenance. They are utterly controlled by the prime landowners, their building codes and readily imposable legal restrictions, all based on the real estate's ownership and control of the highways, sewers, water lines, the metabolic guts of all US towns and cities. When the government owns the wealth and controls the issuance of its money, it is socialism. The New Deal was not trying to deceive the people, but was engaged in a rescue operation of the first order and was hopeful of not irritating the people psychologically by what it seemed was critically mandatory to accomplish. Paradoxically, the first people they irritated greatly were yesterday's rich, in particular those who were as yet living on the dividends and interest of as yet solvent industrial corporation stocks and bonds. In fear of the New Deal, they sought to discredit Roosevelt by a word-of-mouth campaign. From 1933 to 1940, individual members of rich gentlemen's clubs in New York were ostracised from membership in the rudest manner by the members if they were not heard to speak frequently of that son of a bitch in the White House. Franklin Roosevelt and his advisors said, in effect, we've got to do what we feel is best for the people by whatever name the best may bear. We've got them depositing again in the banks and are rehabilitating all those mortgage properties, which we've inherited by loaning the new owners of the properties funds at negative interest, provided they will rehabilitate the property, re-roof or put in a bathroom, etc. To those who understood some of its intricacies, everything was now out in the open about the world of banking. The New Deal said it was going to prohibit usurious rates of interest. The banks must earn enough to keep themselves going, but only can charge V2% for interest. Banks were regulated just like the post office. No banker had authority beyond that of a postmaster. The New Deal completely separated from banking what Morgan and many of the private banks had been doing, taking deposit money and putting it into common stocks and even into the banker's own highly speculative private ventures. Thus came the New Deal's Securities and Exchange Commission and the complete separation of banking and initial risk financing, or at least supposedly so. Banks' trust departments could as yet buy and sell corporate venture stocks for clients' accounts, however. There were a number of individual bankers who went far beyond unwise banking practices and who, as individuals, took personal advantage of the information they had of individual depositors' affairs and their privilege as top bank officers to do truly inimical things to enrich their own position. Few today remember that a half century ago, a number of New York and Chicago's top bankers were sentenced into penitentiaries. The New Yorkers into Sing Sing, the senior partner of JP Morgan and Company, the president of the National City Bank, the president of Chase Bank, every one of them had been found to be doing reprehensible financial tricks. They were selling their own stocks short. They were opening their friends' mail and manipulating the stock market. They were manipulating everybody. They were way overstepping the moral limits of the privileges ethically existent for officers in the banking game. So a great house cleaning was done by the New Deal. The banking story is best told by a poem that was at the time allegedly composed by Ogden Nash, but was never, to my knowledge, formally published and copyrighted. It was, however, memorized and widely recited from copies often typewritten by those who remembered it. Butcher, baker, candlestick maker. I'm an autocratic figure in these democratic states, a dandy demonstration of hereditary traits, as the children of the baker bake the most delicious breads, as the sons of Casanova fill the most exclusive beds. Seduction is for sissies, but a he-man wants his rape. Daddy's total list of victims was embarrassingly rich, and one of them was mother, but he couldn't tell me which. Well, I didn't go to college, but I got me a degree. I reckon I'm a model of the perfect SOB. I'm a debit to my country, but a credit to my dad, the most expensive senator the country ever had. I remember Daddy's warning that raping is a crime unless you rape the voters 1 million at a time. how our parents forgot, etc. I'm an ordinary figure in these democratic states, a pathetic demonstration of hereditary traits, as the children of the cop possess the flattest kind of feet, as the daughter of the floozy has a waggle in her seat. My position at the bottom of society I owe to the qualities my parents bequeathed me long ago. My father was a married man, and what is even more, he was married to my mother, a fact which I deplore. I was born in holy wedlock, consequently by and by. I was rooked by every bastard who had plunder in his eye. I invested, I deposited, I voted every fall, and I saved up every penny, and the bastards took it all. At last I've learned my lesson and I'm on the proper track. I'm a self-appointed bastard and I'm going to get it back. Our parents forgot to get married. Our parents forgot to get wed. Did a wedding bell chime? It was always a time when our parents were somewhere in bed. Then all thanks to our kind, loving parents, we are kings in the land of the free. Your banker, your broker, your Washington joker. 3 prominent bastards are we, tra-la. 3 prominent bastards are we. Not very nice.
I was about to say, not very nice is right. Thank you for reading that.
To accomplish their restartings in all areas of the US economic system, the New Deal also set up the Works Progress Administration to get people jobs and the Reconstruction Finance Corporation to get the big industries going. Among the first of the New Deal's emergency acts of 1933 was the establishment of the Works Progress Administration, which provided jobs for approximately anyone who wanted them. Artists, mathematicians, etc., as well as all white and blue-collar workers, and of course all day labourers and such. Then, pressed by the labour unions and the political urge to avoid the characteristics of socialism and get the heretofore unemployed millions off WPA, the New Deal's Works Progress Administration, the government financed new buildings and granted mortgages for longer and longer periods to encourage people to undertake the production of much-needed homes and other buildings. It must be noted that the rejuvenated building industry was reset in motion as a concession to the building trades and a move to increase employment, not as a much-needed evolutionary advance in the art of human environment controlling. The unions were so strong as to be able to push the New Deal very hard in the direction of resuming only yesterday's multifoldedly inefficient one-off building design techniques and materials as the activity in which they could establish maximum employment. Technically ignorant bank officers became the authorities who alone judged the design validity of the structures and architectural acceptability of the building projects, funds for the building of which they authorised as mortgage-secured loans of their bank depositors' funds. The New Deal went on to rationalise its strategic acts by arguing to itself, in order to continue as a nation, we must have our national defence. Since it is established that there is nowhere nearly enough life support to go around in this world, if we don't have a formidable defence, if we don't have a formidable national defence, we're going to be successfully attacked by hungry enemies. Our national defence can't carry on without steel and the generation of electricity, the production of chemicals and other imperative industrial items. The FDR team soon concluded that the industries producing those absolute defence necessities were to be called our prime contractors. The prime contractors must be kept going at any cost. So we'll give war production orders to the prime contractors to produce such and such goods. The contractors with signed government contracts can then go to the banks and borrow the money to pay their overhead and to buy the materials and power and to pay the wages to produce the goods. Then we, the government, will pay the producers for the finished goods and services, and they can pay off their loans from the bank. Money paid by the prime contractors as wages will give people buying power, which will allow them to start other economic production systems going. This became a monetary irrigation system, still in use today in 1980 US affairs, which works at a rate providing about 10 recirculations a year, following upon each major war order initiated by and paid for by the government. In the depths of the Depression of 19... Oh, sorry, stop there.
I was going to see if anybody wanted to make a comment or...
Well...
Because I think in a way became... Please.
So, the first one was 1933.
Yep.
So the Glass-Steagall Act. What has happened to it?
Been repealed.
Okay.
And that's why we had 2008.
All right. But even to do it, it was already gutted. By the time it's officially repealed, it was gutted. Second, what happened to unions?
They got stronger.
For
Are
a
they
period,
still-
yeah. No,
For a
they're
period.
not there now. They're done.
Okay.
in this.
And it happened from when? Their demise happened from when?
I would say probably the 1980s till now.
I would say
Slowly.
before,
Really? 70s?
from the 50s,
Ooh.
from the McCarthyism. You look surprised.
A little bit. Yeah. I'm looking to learn, actually.
Yeah.
From
You're
you.
right. Yeah. And then what happened to us? Are we not just repeating the same thing? So the question are, were we educated? Are we educated? It looks to me, if you take the big banks today, right? If you take Wall Street, the banks are still a major group, right? And you take the profit of the big banks, and there are two main ways of them making money: interest and capital gains. That is trading. Which one is the majority? And by far, you take any of the banks. Now, what is happening today to the regional banks? What is happening currently in the US to regional banks?
Being bought.
Yes, they're dying. Because the condition of that banking, because the regional bank, they live by income, right? Interest income, mostly.
Yeah.
The whole,
yeah.
I don't know, of the mortgages, I don't know how much is held by them. I'm talking about commercial mortgages. So they're dying. And they're being bought by the JP Morgan, the Citibank, and all these things. The big five: Capital One, Citibank, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and I don't know which one. So we keep on just repeating the same stuff, isn't it? Did we learn? Are we educated? And I was referring to this Deuteronomy 5:9 in the Bible. I don't know if you pick what I meant. I will curse you to the third or fourth generation. We forget after 60 years, finish. So we don't remember history. Right? And then we've been formatted in the first generation. That's the generation of sin. We are formatted into something, into some belief, some practices. Second generation is to suffer from it. We are the sons of the sinners. We are 40. The only time that we start thinking about getting out of that is the third generation, because they can question. The second generation was under the authority. The third generation start getting loose. And the fourth generation is free from that original sin. So if you take that metaphor back to what it is, hey, there is a cycle, there are cycles, and there is a super cycle of 80 years. What's the name of this Russian economist? What's the name? That talk about the big cycles. We need to be knowledgeable and understanding what happened in order to instruct us or feed us and help us in dealing with what we have today. So to Anne, entrepreneurship history. Entrepreneurship history. Entrepreneurship is in the projecting, in the thinking, in the putting together things. But we test the resiliency of those things by understanding what happened, what went wrong, why did it go wrong, from a point of view that is unbiased. And the only way that you have information that is unbiased is that you have no interest in that in that situation. That is the third or fourth generation. So it's an obligation in terms of education for a long history in a way that is objective. Right? That was my point. Okay.
I think I'll just make a quick comment. It's actually kind of long, so I'll just try and consolidate my thoughts really quickly. Is that you're seeing the decline in community banks, which actually are the primary lenders to small businesses, which is a major problem. And once you see this consolidation, now you're starting to see another type of financing that is starting to, and banks are getting into this, big banks are getting into this anyway. You're seeing entrepreneurship having to come from private capital, usually, from specifically venture capital. And so that's really going to even consolidate industries even more, where there's not going to be any small business owners, essentially. So you're starting to see, with the bank consolidation, it's a bigger problem than, and community banks are uniquely, kind of unique to the United States, but that's a major issue right now. And then now we're becoming reliant on venture capital for our new businesses, and that's a big problem because that really is the old boys network, if you really want to look at it. So that's a very brief snapshot of what I think is going on. I don't have a lot of it. I have some empirical evidence to prove that, but I did a study on community banks a while back, and that was 2015, and they were consolidating then. They've been consolidating ever since 1980. So this is not a new trend. And once you see the big banks only be the ones that are either loaning the money, they don't loan to small businesses. And then those startups you're becoming reliant on venture capital for all your innovation. And so that is different. That's a different world that we're living in. And you're right, Manu. We haven't learned, because what we saw was a consolidation before, and a consolidation of wealth. And we're seeing a different type of consolidation now. And I think it's actually worse. That's my thought. Anyway, that's an uplifting thought. We're about 12:45, so why don't we go to takeaways? Thank you, John, for reading. Steve, you want to get us started, or are you still there?
Just a question, where did we stop now? Before?
Yep, thank you for saying that, Manu. I believe, hang on, let me just double check here.
If you would, type in there, start here on the date. Right?
I think we stopped right here, right?
Yes.
Type in
Yeah,
there,
because also,
start here August 12th.
and I'll mail it to you, Steve. All right, Steve, why don't you
Well,
get us started.
Thank you, Joe, a lot for conducting this meeting tonight. And you're on your retreat, so you've got your laptop there, and you continued to support this call. Thank you very, very much. I'm really grateful, Anne, that you're back. I'm grateful that John's here. We really have a good crew, Manu and Victor. I love our feedback and what's going on. And I just want to say that I think this week that you joined us was a particularly good week for you to join, because the previous weeks I think it'd be worthwhile for you to review it, but you mostly talked about it's almost like prehistoric. We've been going through like Aristophanes' map of 200 BC and different kind of and how merchandise moved around the world or across the world until it could move around the world. And, you know, the idea that the earth was a flat plane and that all this commerce took place. So it does give, over the last few weeks, the last couple of months, it does give a good background as to what Bucky talked about today. But I thought today was particularly up to date in terms of what we were talking about. Last week was pretty good. It was semi-current, but just because we seem to be falling short all the way down the line in terms of what Bucky's expectations would be. And so I think this is a great week for you to join us. And if you have a chance, I'm going to do what I can to remember to just send you all the links so that you don't have to go back and find them. If anybody wants the links, just send me an email to steve@myfavoritementor.com and say, hey, send me a sheet with all of our links, and I'm happy to do it. I've done a pretty good job in either keeping the page in the email or putting in the previous call. But, you know, if you want all the links, send me a press on them. My takeaway, I thought that Richard's point about about him picking on the U.S. I think the U.S. really needs to be picked on right now. We are just so partitioned and polarized, and education is being everything is being weaponized. I mean, any point of view, any point of view is being weaponized in America right now. And like there are people who, even though I'm not saying one thing or other, because I think there are good points on Republicans and Democrats, but Trump and the Republicans brought 62 lawsuits in America in different states to contest the elections in each of the different states. 62 lawsuits. Not one of them was dealt with in a court, in courts that were based on Republican governors. Judges or Democratic governors. Many of the courts that threw the case out were Trump-appointed judges, and yet, in spite of the fact that 62 failed cases came up, still somewhere around 30% of Americans believe that the election that the last presidential election was flawed and that Trump ought to be president. I mean, it's freaking mind-boggling. And and that has created all sorts of like walls. I mean, a lot of people aren't willing to talk even. I sat in my high school reunion today with a guy who was a pretty good buddy of mine in high school. We're still friends. He was involved in education in America. He was a principal of a junior high school and in a high school, and yet he supports Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida, who has changed the history books to say that slavery was beneficial to slaves. Now, I'm an existential type of person who believes, a terrible experience can be a wonderful training ground for positive outcomes, but that's only a rare occasion. Most people who are raised in trauma have been wounded, and it affects their kids, and it's amazing the kind of lack of compassion and lack of sensibility and lack of respect that human beings, especially in America, have for each other. It boggles my mind. I was surprised today to learn about financing cars. I thought I was an expert in finance. You know, and Joe talked a little bit about banks and what's going on. We've had some bank foreclosures. They've been in the national news. They're calling them, you know, small regional banks. But when people who know banking look at these things, we're having a collapse of the banking system one more time. And the people who are watching this are saying that because the Fed continues to raise interest rates in America, it makes the value of bonds go down. And 90% of our banks in America have their holding in bonds. So the higher the interest rate goes, the less the bigger discounts are on the bank assets. So the less stable is our entire banking system one more time. And you know, we went through the New Deal, we went through
You're breaking up, Steve. You're breaking up, Steve.
Yeah.
Steve, you're breaking up.
I'm gonna read.
Steve,
Yeah.
you're breaking up.
Okay. I'm really grateful for today's conversation, and I'm going to read these chapters because I think they're profound, and I'm complete. And good to have you. How are you feeling, and what are your takeaways tonight? Did you all hear me?
Who did you?
Yeah.
And yes.
Oh, right. Okay. Right. Yeah, Steve. Okay, there are quite a few things that you've just said as well just now. Wow. Okay, first and foremost, you're including the recordings in the every week, right? In our what do you call the calendar, on the calendar? Yeah. You put it there.
Yeah, but I haven't been consistent with it, and I have them all on the sheet, and I can send it to you.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah, that's actually good enough if it's in there. You know, I can keep track of it there. Okay, first, I just want to, the biggest, one major takeaway is this, Manu, when you say that God is not text. Yeah, I'm actually reflecting back because we had some struggles with a friend who owns a business. She was telling me, she said, and you know, there's this one particular church, they're very good with their congregation because the numbers that join them is huge. You're looking at thousands, and they grew so quickly, right? And just saying that, and we really have to look at how they're doing their marketing, you know, and learn from there for our business. So I had to remind her and say, you know what, we had people telling us, oh, you know, this church is really good at bringing in people and what do you call, building their congregation, all that, you know, and they're very good with the messaging and social media and so on. So I had to remind them, I said, you know what, the churches, their job is to take care of the congregation, right? But their job is really not about figuring out how to bring in revenue. Okay, so because you have that what do you call, the collection every week, and that comes from the congregation, right? But their job is really not to go out there and bring in revenue, and therefore the revenue is given to them, and also a lot of donations, a lot of help. Number two is that they don't have to pay for their marketing. You know, I said, you and I, we run businesses, we have to pay for our own marketing, we have to pay our people, we have at the same time, we have to figure out how to generate revenue. So in order to do marketing, they get it for free. You know, the churches, they got people volunteering all sorts of skills, and they get the best in their church will be the one who will be contributing their services and the expertise for free. I say, you and I don't get it for free. At the same time, we have to market, and we have to get revenue, literally production, everything. Okay, so it was. I just want to put out there that and it is about making people believe. I'm like, wow, that's such a big one for me there. And then the other one I just want to add in, because we're talking about entrepreneurship, right? We were actually so close to tying up our curriculum, right, because we're doing it for the K to 12, and it's a really nice fit into university. So we're looking at universities to collaborate with. So one of the things I got, this was about a few years prior to COVID, right? We were in talks with a university in the UK, and they were very different in how they run it, because it wasn't, because they're not a public university, right? So and then I learned that in the university, any ideas or a business that you start while you're in uni belongs to the university. Okay, I was like, what? And then students who start the businesses in their program, the entrepreneurship program, belongs to the university, and the universe to take back their business idea and the business that they start, they have to pay the university for it. They're already paying the university for the education, right? And the facilities and so on, right? And now the university is asking them to pay the university to get their business back. I was like, whoa, no, we're not going down that route with them, And I had people coming to me and say, and all these business ideas from your students, yeah, you should have percentage that it belongs to the school as well. We kind of sat on the idea and did nothing about it because it didn't feel right. Yeah, it just didn't feel right. But that's the nature of the education systems around the world. Okay, I get that kind of advice, not from overseas, and it's also from people locally. Okay, yep. So that's my massive takeaway today. Richard, how do you feel, and what is your takeaway today? Richard, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. Anyway, it was a nice segue from you over to me, because I'm taking away some memories that take me back to my University of Calgary days, 29 years of such. And one of the things that I was always troubled with at the university is what I consider to be the overemphasis on the importance of being able to demonstrate analytical skills in order to graduate with a degree, or at least a higher degree of a PhD. And that kind of fits with what Manu was saying earlier, and I think Joe too, but multiplication by dividing, and forgetting the integration part, and forgetting the synthesis part. So no wonder we have some of the problems that we have with people graduating out of universities and it not being very practical. My other side, though, which speaks to what Anne was just talking about, I started up with some colleagues an entrepreneurial company with the investment from a University of Calgary, and they did not own what we started, and we were able to pay them something like 350% back on the loan that they gave us. And today we're celebrating our 40th anniversary of a viable company, and we're in about 30 different countries, including more recently out of our colleagues in Australia, in Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Pakistan, Korea, South Korea. So yeah, it's brought back many memories. Also, I tried to teach chaos theory to my social work students, and they were really reluctant to accept the idea that theoretical idea that you would learn in academia had any practical relevance out in the field. But when they took the concepts that we were teaching out of chaos theory into the real world, they came back and said, oh my God, they work. The gap between what academia thought was practical and what the real world thought was practical was narrowed considerably. And so there is room for academia and the practical side of education to actually work in concert with each other. So that's the big takeaway I'm taking away this evening. So I'm over to you, Manu. And what did you, how are you feeling? What did you take away for today?
I feel grateful. I feel thankful. Unfortunately, John had to leave earlier, so we didn't hear his takeaways. But nonetheless, next time he's going to tell us, you know, what it was. With all the discussion that we had, what came to me is that we are short in memory most of the time. That's one. But the second thing is this one, is all that count is teleology. It is equanimity. It is education. And specifically history to learn from. And I would say the road to freedom is a long and winding one. Only education and action will free me. And there is no freedom without responsibility. So that's my biggest takeaway here. You have to be a lifelong learner, endure, and seek to cooperate to understand what the other phases in order to understand the whole. So that's my takeaway. Joe, how do you feel? What do you take away?
Feel very fortunate to have been here tonight. I appreciate John reading this evening. You know, I have a ton of takeaways this evening. I mean, want to thank you, Manu, for sharing your experience with Nassim. Harami, I always say his name incorrectly, but in the beginning of the evening, I actually had done some looking up just as you know, as we were talking. But I think this is, you know, we covered a lot of ground as far as the consolidation of industries. We talked a lot about the banking industry. I've uploaded an article that I think that is very informative when it's talking about the future of finance when it comes to business in general. You know, I think the most important takeaway that I think that I can take away this evening is how to think critically and the importance of the work that Anne's doing. And we had another presentation at 52 Living Ideas by someone named Kirby Erner, and I you know, Richard. And Kirby has an approach that he teaches the kids Martian map, and essentially what it is they basically they approach problems with the ability to be able to explain it to somebody from another planet, what you did and why you did it. They don't teach them how to do it. The kids explore on their own. And so that's thinking critically. And that's thinking innovatively, if that's a word. And Anne, what you're doing with entrepreneurship, the kids they have a problem and they're figuring it out. And so that's where you're actually just teaching the kids to think and not teaching them ideas. And I think that that's the most important thing. Is you're not creating a belief system for them. You're actually creating or building their imagination, I should say. So, there's, I think that that's my major takeaway, is that the importance of education, the importance of creativity, the importance of knowing history as well, Manu. I think you're absolutely right. We have not learned from our past, and we're seeing a different evolution in finance. And yeah, I think that the best we can, we have to do, do our best in order to ensure the next generation has something to actually work for. So thank you, Anne, specifically for your work. And it's great to have you back as well. And so, I appreciate everybody's contributions tonight. There's actually, I'm going to post one more link. It's one of my favorite videos of Richard Feynman. And actually it's a great 5-minute video of and he says, the idea of being able to explain your ideas, and how to essentially, the standard for explaining an idea is explaining it to somebody from another planet. Anyway, reminded me a little bit of Curry's Martian math. That's all. So I really appreciated everybody's time. I know I'm 8 minutes over, so I know Kelly would be upset, but I'm happy to see everyone. So if anybody has any final thoughts, or if you need to grab anything out of the chat, let me know. I would say the one last thing I would say is that one podcast with the Freakonomics podcast, I really do think that that's an important podcast, explaining American individualism and why Americans think the way they do. That is that's part of part of this is cultural. So I mean, it's I think it's important to recognize that. All right, everybody. I will hopefully I'll see everyone next week. And thank you for your time this evening. I had a great time.
Take care, everybody. Drive safe, Steve.
Take care.
What's that?
Drive safe.
Oh, thank you. I will.
Bye, Manu.
I'm approaching.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.